I read a lot of financial statements, a lot of math involved. When I was in high school, I didn't take math much at all. For me to be a math guy kind of now is
Today I have Jan Allen with me, and it's time to discuss corporate finance. Jan Allen, thank you for joining me today.
my pleasure. I appreciate you having me.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I know very little about corporate finance. When I was pursuing my MBA, I took a class on corporate finance,
Yes.
but outside of that, I have no real knowledge about what you would actually do on a day to day. So let's start there.
Yeah.
On a typical day, what is your job like working in corporate finance?
Yeah, thanks. It's very interesting. I didn't know a lot about I didn't know anything about corporate finance. I've been doing this for like 35 years. So, but day to day, I speak with a lot of companies around the United States, companies of all different sizes. So my day is usually meeting, actually quite like this, through video calls, listening a lot to companies that are seeking financing. And generally, the financing is a couple million, $5 million is kind of the average of what I do. And the day to day is really listening to companies. I read a lot of financial statements that companies would that send me that information. A lot of math involved, and when I was in high school, I didn't take math much at all. So, for me to be a math guy, kind of now is it's pretty ironic, at least for in my mind. So, but it's just listening to companies, understanding their problems. Every company's got some issues, a lot of opportunities that they want to take advantage of, that they need financing to do expansions and things like that. But it really comes down to people, speaking and listening, communicating, well. Appearances is important, but reading and listening is my day to day.
Okay, so now I think when an individual, they're looking for financing for a house or a car or something like that. They go to the bank, they may pull a credit report, see how credit worthy you are. And I
Yeah.
believe businesses have that as well. I believe there's a credit rating that goes with businesses as well. So what happens when they're looking for some kind of financing? What kind of things do you look at to establish the health of a company?
It's different in commercial finance and corporate finance. A credit score, most companies have a credit score. It's similar to a FICO, but it is different at the same time. But that's probably one small component of what is looked at. The information is looked at. And mostly it's financial statements. They'll send in maybe 3 year ends of financial statements. Usually, a certified public accountant, a CPA, will put those together. They send those to me, as well as we call it an interim statement in the mid-year, like in June of this year. We get that financial statement. What does the company do? An outline. What are their products? Who are their competitors? What are the markets that they operate in? So, you get a bunch of information in, and then you analyze it. I will analyze all of that information. And within the financial statements, you've got the balance sheets and the income statements and the cash flows and, all of that. So it's pretty in-depth underwriting, called underwriting and analysis. So it's a lot different than if you were to go get a car or a house. A lot of that's based on credit scores alone, and how much you have borrowed personally. On the corporate side, it's a lot different because it's a lot more in depth.
When you're evaluating a company, obviously you have all that paperwork you have to go through and everything. Who are the people that you deal with? You talked about CPAs. Do you deal with like their board, for instance, or their VPs, the president, the CEO? What people are you actually dealing with?
It's all over the map. All of the above that you just mentioned. It depends on the size of the company. So, for example, if there's maybe a smaller company, it might be family owned. Family. I deal a lot with this, where a family has owned the company. A dad or a grandfather started the company some years ago, and it just keeps going down the line into the children. So with those types of company, I deal with the business owner, who is the ultimate owner of the company. Then as the size of the company grows, and when I say size, it's really revenue. I wouldn't be talking with the owner anymore, as I would with a smaller company. But as the company grows, and has a bigger revenue size, then I might be talking with the chairman or the chief financial officer, and those are in the, revenues in the 20-30 million dollar range. If it's above that, it would be generally the chief financial officer of the company that I would be speaking with.
That makes complete sense. Okay, so
Yeah.
when you're evaluating the companies, and you get this like that the stack of papers you have to go through and everything, and all these conversations you need to have. What is
Yeah.
the time frame typically from the time you get, I guess, the initial request that they're looking for financial assistance, from the time it's approved or not approved? How much time passes usually?
And that's a great question because it's really the type of product, the commercial loan product they're looking for. If it's a commercial loan for a big piece of equipment, let's use an example of maybe it's a $1 million piece of equipment. Those tend to go quicker, because you're focused on one piece of equipment. You know the value of the equipment because they're typically going to buy it new, and then you look at those financial statements to make sure that the structure of the loan that I would do works for the company. The payments aren't too high. The company can handle it from a balance sheet standpoint, their working capital and so on. That typically will go in less than a week. I can get that set. Now, there are other loan products such as revolving lines of credit. Those entail a lot more work because the accounts receivable, inventory are used as collateral. And so there are audits that need to be done. Bank does their own audits, and that could take up to a month to get done. So, long-winded answer to your great question is anywhere from maybe 3-4 days up to a month.
That's good information. Okay, so now when it comes to reviewing all this, do you do this by yourself? Do you work with a team? Does it get escalated? Each person has their own part. What's that like?
I've done this for a very long time, so I do have a team that I work with, and I make the final call on anything that gets done. But it's definitely a team effort.
Okay. Okay. Now, for you specifically, do you work inside of another company? Do you work at a bank? Are you self-employed? What's that like for you?
Currently, I'm the chief credit officer at a bank, and I'm speaking to you from Salt Lake City. It's downtown Salt Lake City. I also, just my longevity of being in this business, I will get calls on a personal level to, hey, Jan, would you be able to help, this company with this or that? And I do that as well. It's just when you've been around a long time, a lot of people and the phone keeps ringing.
Let's steer the ship towards education for a little bit. So if someone wants
Sure.
to do what you're doing and they're just starting out their education career, do they need a bachelor's degree to do this? Does it need to be in finance? What's a good path for them to pursue?
My background in education, I'm originally from Ohio, so I graduated from Ohio State University, and I got a bachelor's degree in business administration. The actual degree is a Bachelor of Science in Business Administration with a focus in finance. And so you can focus a little bit, whether it's marketing or finance or accounting. But mine is in finance, and so I just followed that path. When I graduated, I went directly to work with a large bank in Detroit.
So if someone is looking to transition into this type of career, do you think, do they need to get a second bachelor's? If they have something unrelated, a bachelor's in biology, we'll say, do they need to get a different bachelor's? Can they just get an MBA? What would that look like from your experience?
Yeah, if they had an MBA, an MBA, they could it would fit right in. So sometimes you'll have a bachelor's in economics or a bachelor's in marketing. Those work as well. Something business related. It's very banking and corporate finance, very heavily analytical. There's a lot of math and not crazy hard math, but math involved. So a person would need to understand math and have that sense of business about them. But your degree, your bachelor could be in really anything as long as if you went to get a master, a 2-year master's program, that's fine.
What about if someone they do not have a bachelor's degree at all? Is it possible for them to kind of start out at the bottom and kind of work their way up, or no, eventually this education or lack thereof is going to be a barrier?
That does happen. I have one person that works for me currently that started out just basic working as teller, a teller at a bank, and then just kept going. He doesn't have a bachelor's degree at all, but just because he's been within the bank environment for years, he essentially grew up in it, and he is phenomenal. So it's harder to do it that way, takes longer to do it that way, but it can be done.
Okay, all right, that's good to know. Okay, so
Yeah.
what about you mentioned math is very integral to this occupation. So taking that off the table for a second, because I'm assuming this would fall right in with what I'm going to ask you. Is there some kind of characteristic of the job that if a person does not like, or something they're not good at, aside from math, that this job probably isn't for them?
You're in an office most of the time in corporate finance, so it's not an outdoor. If you like to be outdoors a lot and things like that, it's really not an outdoorsy naturally, right? It's not an outdoorsy um, job. You have to love to talk to people. You have to get to know them because at the end of the day, and I think this is the thing with most jobs is it all comes down to people communicating, building relationships. So you got to be comfortable. You got to be outward thinking. Like an introvert probably wouldn't feel comfortable, doing in the commercial finance job. It's just people. Communication, very important. The way you talk, the way you present yourself. So it's you got to love those attributes of the job. There is some travel generally required. The more senior you get, if you're dealing with a company in North Carolina, I tend to hop on a plane and go to North Carolina and visit the company. Go to California, visit a company. So there is some travel involved depending upon the specifics of the job, but those would be the ones that come to mind, those attributes.
For you, is the traveling more about building and maintaining relationships, or is that actually required to do what you do? Do you need like wet signatures or something like that, where you need to physically be in the presence of someone?
It comes down to two things. There's the risk component where you want to go out and look somebody in the eye, understand, look at their business. I've taken thousands of tours over all the years. You look at a lot of manufacturing plants. You go look at their employees on the job and you look at the products that are being made. You look at the equipment that they're using, inventory that's there. So it's a risk. It comes down to character of the borrower. So you do that and you assess the risk in person. It's just not the same. I can look at a financial statement, but boy, I'll tell you, when you get out there live and you meet them and you see them in action, it's totally different. Gives a different perspective. And then there's the relationship part that you mentioned. Having a strong relationship with these borrowers, these companies is important. So once you get the risk side out of the way, and that tends to be at the very beginning of the whole process, then that's a customer that's there ongoing over the years. So you want to go out, make sure everything's going okay. Maybe once a year, shake their hands and find out, is everything going okay? And so those are the two components of why there's I call them the site visit.
That makes complete sense. And I wouldn't have thought about that, but it does create a very different picture for the profile. You have all the written stuff and everything, but then actually going there and
Yeah,
seeing what they have, seeing their people, seeing the building, seeing their equipment, seeing the inventory makes complete
yeah.
sense. So you talked about networking and going out and seeing people. Obviously, we just talked about going to the on-location visits. What other kind of networking opportunities do you take advantage of to try to further your relationships with other businesses?
Many times there you would have a relationship with a CPA firm that deals with their own client base. They're all companies generally. And so many times that first discussion of what a company needs is between the company and their CPA. If the company is a little low on cash liquidity or they need new equipment, what have you, they usually talk with their CPA about that. And then if the bank has a relationship with the CPA, they'll call me and say, Jan, I have this client that fits what you do. And the way they know what I do is that ongoing networking that I have with that CPA firm. And so then the CPA will refer that in. That's one. Attorneys are another. They have a similar relationship with the CPA, not quite the same, but it's very similar. Attorneys will call me and talk about, hey, I know this, one of my clients heard they need some financing. You might give them a call and you can use my name and so on.
That is awesome. Okay. Um,
Yeah,
so what about hours? So different occupations lend themselves to like a very traditional 9 to 5 or like similar spectrum.
yeah.
What's that like for you? Are you regularly pulling 60 hours a week? 40 is very standard. What's that typically like?
I worked a lot more when I was younger. You're trying to, get up the ladder of success. But yeah, generally, I'm going to say generally the hours are from like 8 to 5. Um, and it depends. And most of these positions, like underwriters and so on, those positions are on a salary basis. So there's some flexibility there. Sometimes just based upon the workload, you have to work over. Maybe there's a week that you're working 50 or 60 hours, but then there's another week where it's calmed down that you can take some extra time off. And so there's some flexibility there. But generally, summary, it's like an 8 to 5.
That's good to know. Now, what about, I have to ask this as well. What about remote? So a lot of times, people in offices, they conduct the same type of work as if they were, in the office or at home or whatever. Obviously, you might still have to travel. But what's that like in your industry? Is remote, is that kind of like, no, we're all back in the office, or there is flexibility there? What's that like?
It's all over the map. There are some banks that are still fully remote. There are some banks that are hybrid. The bank that I work with now, I'm on a hybrid schedule. So I'll work remote on Mondays and Fridays. And then I'm in my office on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. And then there are some that are all back in the office. It just depends on the company, the bank itself. If I work for myself, naturally, it's all remote. I have worked for myself over the years in the past, and this is the office that I work out of. And so it depends on your position and the company you're working with.
Sticking with working for yourself for an instance, is that possible in this type of job? Is it possible for someone to work for themselves and work as like a kind of like a go-between, I guess, between a business and
Yeah,
a bank to get the financing? Is that possible? How would that work?
it is possible. I think, just my opinion, because I've done it. I couldn't do it when I was younger, but only as I got older that I could do it. And the reason for that is experience. Is I've seen every problem there is to be seen in the commercial finance world. And so and such that many banks don't have that level of expertise. Maybe it's a smaller bank, and so I tend to get complicated problems, bank finance problems, commercial finance problems, that I'm able to work with the company, the borrower itself, and advise them and structure a transaction, and then I can go to one of my bank contacts that fit a particular product, go to them and say, look, here's the situation, here's how I've structured this and why it makes sense. And so that's that gap that a lot of times needs to be filled, just depending upon the borrower and the bank and so on.
That is awesome. So many opportunities in what you do. That is fantastic.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, this is the part of the show where I do like to give the person I'm speaking with an opportunity to talk about a project they're working on or a cause they believe in. If you want to talk about your business, Jen, I'd like to hand the floor over to you.
Well, I appreciate that. So, I mean, I think you have a very important podcast. I think people need to hear different viewpoints of jobs that might strike them up. And this very topic is, I wrote a book about it. It took me about 11 years, but I wrote a book. It's on Amazon. I got it right here. It's called Searching for Change. And it's really I'm a hillbilly guy, right? So it really took me from when I was a kid. I didn't know math and, not a lot of opportunities, single parent household. And how did I get to be in the banking industry where I am? And it's a book that details, how all of that occurred. And I really wrote it for my kids and my grandkids, but other people started wanting to read it, so I made it a book. So that's my spin for myself today.
I love that. I love that. I'll make sure I get the link from you so I can throw that in the show notes, the website, all those places. So when people are looking for that information, they could easily find it.
There's a lot of subtleties in there. It's not just education. It's not just this. It's determination. It's discipline. It's what's in, the determination that's in your heart. Not so much here. It's like, I'm going to get this done. So there's a lot of that in the book too.
I've spoken to several people, and it's interesting that the number of people where it's like, I did this for my kids. And I think that's really, really cool. And then other people are just kind of like, oh yeah, I like that too. Give that to me. I want to check that out. Jen, it's been absolutely awesome having you on Time to Discuss. And we talked about what it's like to be in corporate finance.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Good job.